Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CPM International Management Conference 2021. CPM Sri Lanka has yet again unveiled its ambitious blueprint for a global conference with speakers and panelists lined up from several countries for its signature event, the International Management Conference 2021. The conference is a much awaited event in the Institute's calendar, and this year it will focus on current disruptions and implications for business, managing, and leading. As you know, this is a virtually conducted conference, particularly owing to the health guidelines and precautions issued by the health authorities and the government of Sri Lanka. As a premier professional management body in Sri Lanka, the Institute of Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka, CPM, ensures the best value to participants. Moving on with the program, the main highlight is that we have received an overwhelming number of registrants than but we already expected. We have over 1,000 registrants for this two-day conference event. So that's a remarkable fact at this point in time where we all are getting used to the digital behavior. Furthermore, all participants will be sent with the feedback form at the end of each day in this two-day conference. So please make sure you fill it up and send it back. So that will be sent to your chat box. And your CPD points or CPD credits will be given based on your completion of 2 days. And as you're all joining on Zoom platform, we have the measures to have a cap on your timing. So based on that, you will receive your CPD points and will also be issued with a valuable digital certificate from CPM Sri Lanka. With that, let me move on to the first and the most important point in the agenda and starting off, which is the keynote. Is the welcome address. To do the honors, let me invite President of Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka, Professor Lakshman R. Vatavala.
Good afternoon. Let me welcome all of you. Our keynote speaker, Mr. S. Renganathan, MD, CEO of the Commercial Bank of Sri Lanka. Just one minute. Thank you. There was some little small problem. Good afternoon to all of you. Our keynote speaker, Mr. S. Renganathan, the Managing Director and CEO of Commercial Bank of Sri Lanka, the Chairman of the Technical Conference Committee, Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka, distinguished speakers, panelists, and facilitators, foreign delegates, CPM Governing Council members, members of CPM, ladies and gentlemen. I have great pleasure in welcoming you to the CPM International Management Conference 2021 on the theme Current Disruptions and Implications for Business, Managing and Leading. CPM is the Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka and are engaged in the grooming and development of managerial skills in Sri Lanka. Hence, the theme has direct relevance in the COVID-19 pandemic to manage and lead our business organizations to overcome current disruptions for which no one had ever planned earlier. Today, the conduct of our conference online and the compulsion to use technology is a major benefit derived by all concerned. The two-day conference will provide you the opportunity to listen to eminent experts who will speak on the different aspects of our theme to enable business managers to reorient themselves to the new managerial skills they should possess. Hence, continuing professional development or CPD is a must and has been made more relevant to those working both in the private and public sector. On the first day of the conference, you will have a keynote address, two special addresses, and a panel discussion together with a conclusion. On each day, we have 10 eminent speakers and panelists giving a total of 20 local and foreign contributors for this international conference. I'm also happy to state that our membership with the Association of Management Development Institutions in South Asia, or AMDISA, has also enabled us not only to have a close linkage with the top business schools in South Asia, such as IIMs, LUMS of Pakistan, IBA of Bangladesh, and many others to contribute to the management development in Sri Lanka. We, as a prominent professional management institution in Sri Lanka, have continued our activities uninterrupted and our programs on management and entrepreneurship, which have been conducted online, and they have drawn many business managers who are very eager to become entrepreneurs. This is indeed a very good sign for the economic development of Sri Lanka. Today we have speakers and panelists from a number of countries, including the UK, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Malaysia, and Australia. And we are very fortunate to have them with us. And I must thank all of them for accepting our invitation to address our conference. We also have others who are eminent both in the government sector, such as the chairman of the Export Development Board, those from universities who are senior professors and academics, those representing the chambers of commerce, young entrepreneurs, the representatives from AMDISA, adding value to our conference. With the COVID-19 pandemic, not only are we working from home, we are striving to create value to our organizations, at the same time cutting down costs, because we will otherwise find that in order that we may lose our jobs. So we are at a great risk. So I know that very many have really been adding value to the work that they are doing. I must also thank the chairman of the technical committee for putting together this excellent program. That is Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka. He's been doing a very good job, a very impressive, and getting a very impressive and eminent panel of speakers and panelists, ably supported by our director, Mr. Dilshan Arsakuratna, who has worked tirelessly behind the scene to make this international conference a great success. This is evident from the large number of registrations, as stated earlier, over 1,000 registrants that we had, and the success will be passed on to every one of you who will be participating at this conference. I'm confident that all who are participating will benefit a great deal from this international conference and enable them to become leaders and managers, and also to create value to to their organizations. So once again, I welcome all of you and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for welcoming everyone for this international conference. So, with that, let me move on to the keynote address, which is the first of the three speeches that are lined up for the day. Prior to inviting the keynote speaker, I would like to take all of you through his illustrious profile. The keynote speaker is none other than Mr. S. Ranganathan, Managing Director and CEO of Commercial Bank PLC. Mr. Sivakrishna Raja Ranganathan is a senior banker who has served Commercial Bank throughout the entirety of his working career. He was appointed as a Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer in July 2018. Mr. Ranganathan has held several key positions in the bank and been deeply involved in its evolution and growth. In July 2003, he led the bank's acquisition of the Bangladesh operations of Credit Agricole Indosuez (CAI), commercial bank's first ever acquisition of a banking operation, and was appointed country manager to Bangladesh, in which capacity he led a team of 225 over a 5-year tenure, building up the bank's operations in Bangladesh. Mr. Ranganathan is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, UK, Chartered Global Management Accountant, fellow of the London Institute of Banking and Finance, and fellow of the Institute of Bankers Sri Lanka, as well as a member of the Sri Lanka Institute of Directors. Mr. Ranganathan currently serves as the Managing Director of Commercial Development Company PLC, Deputy Chairman of Commercial Bank of Maldives Private Limited, Director of Lanka Financial Services Bureau Limited, Director of Sri Lanka Banks Association Guarantee Limited, Vice Chairman of International Chamber of Commerce Sri Lanka, Executive Member of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Council Member of Employers Federation of Ceylon, as well as an Executive Member of the Council for Business with Britain. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. S. Ranganathan.
The founder and president of the Institute of Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka, Professor Lakshman Vatavala, distinguished members of the Institute, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I wish to thank Professor Vatavala for inviting me to deliver a keynote address at this virtual conference on current disruptions and implications for business, managing and leading. I have great pleasure in sharing my thoughts and views and inaugurate this great conference. You will also have an opportunity to listen to eminent speakers and panelists in a more elaborative manner, explaining the subject in detail. All of you are aware that we are all living with a deadly, invisible, and invincible pandemic, which has changed the entire world in a matter of 12 months. But this is not the first time that our world has faced a pandemic of this magnitude. So, my dear colleagues and the participants, let me share the subject matter with a slide presentation to make it more effective for you to listen to me. I hope you can see the slide.
Yeah, okay, we can see.
Thanks. The deadliest pandemic reported in the world happened exactly 100 years ago. The Spanish flu, or the influenza outbreak, which lasted from 1918 to 1920 in 4 waves. A world much simpler and more vulnerable than today was ravaged mercilessly by this pandemic. Today, we are fortunate that technology and medical fields are far more sophisticated than those days. 1/3 of the population of the world, that is approximately 500 million people, were infected at that time. The global death toll due to this pandemic is estimated to be between 20 to 50 million. The death toll in the then Ceylon due to the Spanish flu was believed to be around 100,000. There was no dramatic end to the said Spanish flu pandemic. It rather faded away with time, though there were several treatments, including flu vaccines, being invented. But even today, the flu vaccine is very much a reality in the Western countries, reporting a substantial number of mortalities. The COVID-19 pandemic, which started in China in late 2019, the current disruption, and quickly spread around the world. To date, over 110 million cases are reported with 2.4 million mortalities, and the disease prevalent in almost everywhere in the world. The pandemic brought about lockdowns, travel restrictions, curfews, and restrictions on day-to-day life that we are now used to calling new normal. There are at least 7 different types of vaccines authorized to be used to combat this virus, with hundreds more in various stages of clinical trials. By February this year, in 2021, 200 million doses of vaccines had been administered around the world. Sri Lanka has managed to handle the prevalence of this virus reasonably well, with over 80,000 reported cases and 445 deaths. Vaccinations have started in the country, with over 300,000 individuals being vaccinated so far in Sri Lanka. So the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about massive changes and disruptions to the entire world. The pandemic has drastically changed consumer behavior, buying patterns, and lifestyles. There is a significant drop in the footfall of customers into businesses, owing the fear of physical contacts and social distancing, and a significant increase in digital transactions. Changed ways of business operations and concepts such as work from home, split teams, virtual meetings, and downsizing of the cadre have become the norm. Banks are experiencing a surge in online channels usage, bringing about both challenges and opportunities. Global economy is experiencing its worst recession since the Great Depression. The global loss of employment due to the pandemic is estimated to be between 10 to 14%, creating a fiscal gap that will widen between the rich and the poor. More than 1 billion jobs in the informal sector is estimated to be wiped out due to this pandemic. So let's take a few disruptions. In my view, I thought I will take up 5 different types of disruptions and go through with you. All these disruptions are significant ones. Some of them have no feasible solutions, at least not yet. Some of them calls for very drastic measures to be adopted, which results in increased social and economic issues. The businesses are undergoing a precarious time to navigate through the rough waters of uncertainty. Let's discuss such disruptions within the time frame given to me and ponder on how to overcome them and emerge as leaders. The first disruption, which is on the slide, is one of the main disruptions, in my view, we face during times such as these, is connecting with changing customer behavior. Let's look at the implications of such disruption. The new normal has brought about a complete change in customer habits. Organizations now must adjust quickly to this changed behavior of customers and innovate, adjust to suit their new requirements. Consumer goods will have to be adjusted to the manufacturing patterns, new patterns, product mixes, and the service industry will have to look for new ways of expansion and serving customers 24/7. Disruptions caused by changing customer behaviors and consumption patterns will put a strain on all aspects of the businesses, finance, HR, and operations. Therefore, how do we manage and lead? We must rebuild and strengthen the relationship with customers. Understand customer trends and reevaluate organizational offering. Manage internal processes to deliver the best of value. That's in regard to my first disruption. Let's move on to the second disruption. Another disruption encountered by businesses is turning massive challenges into a meaningful change. Disruption is challenging, but it's all about turning big challenges to meaningful change. Financial, operational, risk, and process challenges can have negative and unsettling implications on the business. Companies are faced with challenges of keeping their business afloat in a declining and shrinking economy. And while safeguarding employees and customers against a deadly virus, which can be a stressful situation. These challenges can have negative implications such as reduced quality of the products, reduced quantity of the products, as well as increasing dissonance of customers, increased pressure on the finances of the company, etc. So how do we manage and lead? The think tanks need to get working on what positive change can be achieved through this unforeseen disruption. Evaluate and review. Can we reduce our costs? Can we change the operating models? Can we change our entire business focus? And can we run with a selected product line? Managing the evolving customer expectations and enriching the customer experience is a must under these disruptive, challenging conditions. Another disruption, in my view, is sourcing of funds. Sourcing of funds for changes caused by disruptions is another tough challenge encountered by businesses. End of the day, businesses must face the massive challenge of needing additional funds to effect the changes that was prompted by the disruptions, despite having to experience a downturn in profits. Additional technology means infrastructure, research and development costs, security costs, and staff training costs, etc. Similarly, operational changes, business line modifications, sales strategy shifts, all these things require funds for implementation. So the pandemic has brought in extra costs of protection of employees and staff from virus and costs affiliated with that. So how do we manage and lead financing disruptions? Managing financing challenges require vision beyond immediate problem. We should look at not only the bottom line, but we should look at the day-to-day cash flows. Where do you aspire your company to be in future? Post-pandemic, do you expect your company to be at which level? Your long-term investments should center around that vision. The strategic vision will help your company to convince your stakeholders to facilitate additional funding requirements. Let's move on to another disruption, technology. With technology being at the forefront of everything, one of the biggest challenges is to introduce technology that delivers results. The pandemic brought about many disruptions and made technology a focus, thereby creating both opportunities as well as threats. Technology has become the focal point of how the business should run, not simply in terms of customer services, but in production, marketing, sales, HR, process engineering, risk management, and the whole overall management. Technology is and will be the link with your customer and your employees. So how you leverage it will decide whether you are going to be a leader or a follower. So how do we manage this challenge? The technological disruptions due to technological changes. How do you use technology to create significant convenience to your customer? If your technology does not solve their problems, your substantial investments do not mean a thing. It makes sense to do your research and take a comprehensive look at your strengths and weaknesses before you embark on investments. You have to have intimate knowledge of your customers' consumption habits and needs. To find them out, you need to utilize cutting-edge technology and continuous research about their requirements. So it is essentially a cycle. Whichever field you operate in, how you leverage technology will be a major part of your success story. Let's look at the fifth disruption, which I have taken up for today's discussion. Managing human capital. Managing human capital is one of the most difficult aspects of a business. The prevailing pandemic situation and the subsequent disruptions that are in force today due to the negative effects have made it extremely difficult to manage. Disruptions caused by matters affiliated to human capital is perhaps the toughest, in my view, to face. How do we manage this situation that arise out of a redundant workforce? Reduce margins, which will result in cut downs and dealing with various complicated human issues that arise out of a pandemic. Whilst corporates might find one set of talent being redundant, it will also find another set with new talent required following the disruptions. So how do you match and fill these talent gaps? Keep motivation levels high. Keep motivation levels of your staff high. Your employees are your most valuable assets. It makes sense to invest in them. It is important to upskill and realign talent into different areas, especially when some talent seem redundant. You have to be innovative once again and invent ways that you can realign talent. It will be a crucial skill that winning organization possess in the near future. You also have to keep reviewing your HR policies and work processes to create efficiencies. My dearest participants, I have touched upon few of the most important and pressing disruptions that have occurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and ways that business can overcome them. As we are speaking, the pandemic is raging on, and so are the efforts to curb it. I think it is reality that all of us now understand that we live in a totally new normal environment. Life will not stay in one place due to this pandemic, nor it will for any other reason. So my friends, businesses have to continue. Maybe it will not be business as usual, but it might be business unusual. We have to innovate. We have to think out of the box. We have to think bigger than the problem to succeed. On that note, I shall end my address and pave the way to many more detailed and intellectual discussions during this conference. Once again, I wish to place on record my sincere thanks to the President of the CPM of Sri Lanka, Professor Vatavala, the organizers, and all the participants, and wish you all a safe and successful years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, keynote speaker, Mr. Ranganathan, for this elaborative and timely address. I'm sure there'll be a lot more that we can highlight during the discussions coming up in the two-day session. With that, let me move on to the first speech. There are two speeches for the day. The first one, let me take the opportunity to invite Dr. Claire Rigg prior to taking the show. Let me take you through her profile. Dr. Claire Rigg is going to speak to us about relearning of fundamentals in new normal and retrospection for future. Dr. Claire Rigg is senior lecturer at the University of Liverpool Management School, where she co-directs the doctorate in business administration. Her research explores the relationship between management learning and leadership practice, with her most recent study exploring lessons from the pandemic for leadership in a digitalized future. She is widely published in leading international journals and is currently the associate editor for the Academy of Management Learning and Education Journal. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Claire Rigg.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you. It's a real privilege. I have some slides which I'll now share. So this is a wonderful title. I didn't choose it, although it sums up very accurately research that I've been doing. Relearning of fundamentals in the new normal and retrospection for future. Or what does the present remind us that we've learned in the past that can enable us to manage the future? And in paraphrasing it yet further, what I'll address is what's the pandemic taught us about managing in an increasingly digitalized world. So it's been said that this pandemic has merely accelerated the trend of history towards increased digitalization in the workplace. In 2019, I and colleagues in the UK conducted a study on how managers and leaders predicted their future jobs and organisations might look like by 2030. And then last year, of course, the pandemic hit and suddenly the future was now. I went back to them in summer 2020 to ask how they'd responded to the pandemic, what lessons they'd learned, and what changes they envisaged would remain even once the pandemic receded and the world opened up again. Now, much of what I described might be no surprise to you. Also, I'm drawing from the UK experience where the extent of the pandemic and the length and depth of lockdown has been much greater than many other countries. However, I also draw from international research that shows our evidence does have applicability beyond our borders. Prior to the lockdown restrictions, digital transformation within organisations was considered to be hindered more by insufficient political, cultural and financial commitment than by technological capacity. By this I mean lack of investment, unwillingness, suspicion of job displacement and protectionism, that sense of our roles couldn't be provided virtually. The pandemic cut through many of these cultural and political obstacles, propelling staff and organisations onto a steep learning curve, which has produced a number of surprising and positive conclusions. Many have shown themselves to be agile and adept at exploitation of technologies to transform communications and to achieve efficiencies through digitalisation. Whether they've proved themselves digitally mature in the sense of also showing the capacity for exploration of new technologies for more radical digital transformations remains to be seen, and anyway is not central to today's talk. I want to talk about these 5 themes with implications for leadership and management in a digital future. Taking place and space first. Post-pandemic, many people forecast a permanent change to ways of working, with continued remote working measures and a move away from the traditional 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 core working hours, as to digital communication enables services to be increasingly available over extended hours. This message is echoed by reports from different countries and sectors. Prior to the pandemic, there were already advocates for agile working, including flexible hours and remote working, but they often faced opposition from cautious directors or suspicious HR professionals. And in my slides in the italics are quotes from some of the people that we interviewed that I won't read out, but you can read them as we go. The enforced home working during the 2020 pandemic has demonstrated what is possible and actually has dissolved quite a lot of the resistance. Remote working changes the emphasis on working spaces, and there's been much speculation that the pandemic might mean the end of the office. The headlines have contained plenty of examples of companies cancelling planned building expansions, downsizing their office footprint, or changing their use of office space. However, it would be premature to say that all jobs that could be done remotely will be so 100%. This isn't what employees universally want, and it brings many management challenges. In our study, and echoed by others, staff generally express a preference for a hybrid future that involves no more than 1 to 3 days a week in an office. However, people differ in their liking for remote and virtual working, particularly if this means working from home. Younger and more junior employees are less likely to have spare space to work at home. Privacy and security is less at home, and for anyone really. Staff live in a range of situations and may not be in an ideal situation for working from home, with lack of access to technology such as computers, phones, or internet. Other people derive enormous amounts of political power by being in the presence of others, so they lose that in remote working. They come alive surrounded by colleagues and find remote working a challenge. But then others thrive on remote working. perhaps not in this example using digital technologies, but certain individuals have probably not noticed that there has been a pandemic. In the old days, we thought of organisations as machines or structures made up of parts that slot seamlessly together. We worked on the basis that if individuals simply fulfill their role description, the system would run smoothly. We now know that this view limits us, and it helps us to understand organisations as a series of interactions, relationships, and conversations in which power and influence are exercised in multiple informal ways, not just through formal authority and hierarchy. Recent decades have taught us that leadership happens through relationships. So what does that mean for communication in an increasingly digitalized virtual organisation? In our study, we found great emphasis was placed on communication with employees, citizens, and customers during the pandemic. And there was much evidence of thoughtful, deliberate, and frequent communication through daily and weekly bulletins, staff surveys, a chief executive weekly video, as well as paying attention to staff mental well-being, both directly in the sense of talk to me if you feel the need to, and indirectly, for example, paying attention to virtual silence. In addition, there were widespread attempts to replicate the informal water cooler and corridor chat of office interactions through the use of Zoom, Teams, Slack, and other platforms for informal coffee mornings and quizzes and the like. Some people found benefits to this world of exclusively virtual communication, but others point to disadvantages. Some found the use of digital platforms such as Teams and Zooms flattened the organisation hierarchy and made senior leaders more accessible to staff. Digital communications have improved the level of participation and involvement of people in many cases, both within and outside the organisation. Meeting attendance has gone up. Directors of larger organisations have been able to address all their employees without hiring a football stadium to fit them all in. Access to international conferences and meetings has opened up without the need for expensive air travel. But exclusive reliance on digital communication whilst remote working have also been found. Firstly, the loss of informal, opportunistic interaction that might wrap around formal in-person meetings. These have been mourned for the benefits that they had for relationship building. Secondly, virtual communication hasn't been seen to offer equivalent benefits for complex interactions, such as problem-solving innovation and resolving conflicts. A third disadvantage has been the replacement of informal face-to-face encounters with formal remote meetings and the resultant intensification of communication. A fourth drawback of the reliance on digital communication relates to recruitment and the acculturation of new staff. The challenge of how to induct newcomers to a virtual organisation has not yet been cracked. In terms of boundaries between work and life, some employees feel a greater sense of autonomy from being able to work remotely and are more productive. But others describe an intensification where their boundaries between work and home lives have become more blurred and their working days extended. In an office workspace, if you're in the midst of a meeting, you wouldn't imagine someone else barging into the room, interrupting you to request an immediate response, or a third person ringing you and expecting you to answer. Yet that has been some people's reality of home working. We cannot be sure whether such intensification is the result purely of remote working or was exacerbated by the crisis of the pandemic. Nevertheless, it echoes other findings that a major challenge people find with remote working is the difficulty of switching off. This highlights the necessity for managers to help staff to manage work boundaries in order to avoid burnout and to maintain well-being. Internationally, the COVID pandemic response shows how rapidly organisations were able to respond to the technological possibilities in many cases. However, international research amongst business professionals across 158 countries raises questions about how prepared businesses are to face new ethical challenges such as ransomware attacks, cryptocurrency transactions, intellectual property disputes, and customer privacy. The rapid development of digital technologies is not being matched by the speed at which regulation and ethical decisions are being made on digital challenges for security, intellectual property, and privacy. At present, very few management or leadership development programs include any attention to the potential or pitfalls of digital technologies to help managers as they become e-leaders, digital commissioners, and in cyber leadership roles. As we move to think about the implications for leadership and management, prior to the pandemic, the literature already reported that a different management approach is required for remote working and virtual teams, one that is more outcomes focused and relies on trust rather than input of visible presence. And this was echoed by participants in our study. Virtual working was described by one as like trying to sustain a long-term relationship, needing connection, commitment, and creativity. Many in our study noted how the lockdown had exacerbated the flaws within traditional management styles and elevated the more emotionally intelligent, flexible, and innovative managers who could adapt to staff not being physically within their site and could trust that their staff were still working. Managers had to learn to delegate more and to be conscious of the messages their implicit lack of trust might be conveying to staff. Allied to the questions of trust and delegation is the importance of managing for outcomes rather than inputs and processes. So looking at the quality of the work produced, not checking the hours spent online. As Lee says, e-leadership requires controlling processes, not people, to enable and empower virtual team members to control themselves. So what are the lessons for managing in a digitalized future? None of this is completely new. There have been virtual project teams, digital nomads, and remote working for several years. Those who have been doing so successfully have lessons to teach us all. However, we can speculate that in the past, those that worked and managed like this were those who chose to do so and were comfortable doing so. What's different now is the scale and the enforced catapulting of so many into working and managing online. I want to draw out some different implications for what future managers or leaders will need to look like, and specifically also for those leading the HR function. It is clear, excuse me, it's clear that leaders of digitalized organizations are and will be facing a number of new challenges in addition to those of traditional management. Not only will they need to continue doing their work to articulate vision, provide direction, motivate, and inspire, they also need to be a number of other things. Firstly, a virtual team leader. They will often be the hub around which a virtual team works in different locations at different times across an extended working day. They'll have to be skilled at managing remote working and building virtual teams, managing through trust, engagement, and a focus on outcomes. They know the importance of induction to enable new starters to feel part of something quickly, and they understand how to mitigate the results of social isolation, boundary creep, and burnout for remote workers. They know to watch out for silence and non-participation in a virtual community as a sign of potential disengagement or loss of mental well-being. They are emotionally intelligent, able to manage ambiguity and uncertainty. They're agile in their approach, open-minded and flexible. They look to design jobs that allow employees to work with flexibility and a degree of autonomy. They're attentive to individual difference and alert to the fact that not all employees have the space, privacy, technology, or desire to work from home. They look for alternative forms of remote working, such as regional hubs, where employees can go to work, albeit that these are still remote from a main office. They welcome hybrid working and think creatively about how to use space and time. The digital leader understands that data is a central resource for their work. They grasp the potential of digital technologies for organization transformation and have sufficient digital literacy to manage their own internal digital specialists, as well as to be intelligent commissioners of digital technologies. They have the knowledge management skills to understand the nature of knowledge sharing and distribution behind the use of any artificial intelligence, and to actively shape the future of digitalization in their organization. They also show cyber leadership in the sense of ability to deal with information warfare, cybersecurity threats, and defense against cyber attacks. If the future is to be more of a hybrid split between on-site and remote working, there will be implications for HR. For example, in any enthusiasm to further exploit the potential of digitalization to reduce office space and to make cost savings, those staff, typically in lower grades, lower paid, who need to be in the office and not at home in light of domestic pressures on space or other circumstances, must not be forgotten. Equally, whilst many staff welcome the experience of home-based working and want to continue with it to at least some degree, other staff need the structure and social context of a workplace. Future policies for home-based working will need to recognise that diversity. And there are various aspects of HR policy which will need review and updating to take account of home-based working, such as health and safety, around boundaries and maintaining boundaries and supporting managers to implement that. Wellbeing policies and policies for induction and onboarding. In conclusion, the past year has propelled organisations into a new normal of creating greater virtual organising and shown some of the benefits as well as disadvantages. From these experiences, successes and challenges, the year has highlighted the kinds of knowledge, abilities and behaviours that are required for e-leadership and cyber leadership. The lessons were already there and we were already going there. We only had to look really at the pioneering digital nomads and the early networked virtual organisations. Now we need to take heed of that recent past as we move into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claire Rick, and special thanks to you for joining when you are in a different time zone than we hosts are here in Sri Lanka, and for taking your time off your busy schedule to enlighten us and all the participants on your worthy content. So I'm sure with the panel discussion going to take place, we'll be able to add more insights to what you deliver.
My pleasure, thank you.
With that, let me take the honor of inviting our second speaker for the next speech. That is none other than Dr. Ravi Fernando, who would be talking to us about 21st century board leadership model and the health emergency. Prior to handing over to him, let me take all of you through his profile. Dr. Ravi Fernando is a blue ocean strategist with a sustainability mindset. He is an alumni of the University of Cambridge, having completed a postgraduate certificate in sustainable business in 2008 and a Master of Studies Sustainability Leadership in 2014. He holds a Doctor of Business Administration degree from the European University in Switzerland in 2015. He also holds an MBA from the University of Colombo and is a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, UK. He holds a Diploma in International Management and completed the Advanced Management Program at the INSEAD Business School in France. He was the United Nations Global Compact focal point for Sri Lanka from 2003 to 2010 and was the founder of the UN Global Compact Sri Lanka Network in 2010 and is a director of UNGC Sri Lanka Board. He is chairman and CEO of Global Strategic Corporate Sustainability Private Limited, which currently operates in China, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. He serves on the boards of Aitken Spence, LOLC, Habitat for Humanity, Multi-Finance Corporation, Ceylon Asset Management, and UN Global Compact in Sri Lanka. His career with multinationals spanned from 1981 to 2003 with Unilever, Sterling Health International, SmithKline Beckham International covering Asia, Middle East and Africa, and in the roles of CEO and Managing Director in Business Development and Marketing in positions between 1981 to 2007. He is the distinguished first CEO of Slintech, the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology, in the tenure of 2008 to 2010. In academia, he was a visiting faculty member of the INSEAD Advanced Management Program from 2005 to 2010 and CDEP France, Managing Business Excellence Program in China, teaching the subject Strategic Corporate Sustainability. He is an executive in residence at the INSEAD School Innovation Center since September 2010 to date and has been enrolled in 10 case studies at the INSEAD Business School between 2006 to 2018. In September 2007, he won a Global Strategy Leadership Award at the World Strategy Summit, receiving the award from Professor Rene Maubon of INSEAD Business School. In November 2015, he published Strategic Corporate Sustainability, 7 Imperatives for Sustainable Business from Patrick Penguin Random House, based on his work at Cambridge University. Dr. Ravi Fernando, over to you.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to all of you. I've already seen 2 excellent presentations made. Professor Watawala and the team, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Today, my session is about the 21st century board leadership model and the health emergency. I must mention that the 21st century board leadership model was something that we crafted around April 2020, as we saw global leaders not able to really grapple with the challenges that were coming at them. Most of the leadership was reactive leadership as opposed to proactive management of crisis. So today, I'm not going to be speaking too much about the model because that will take a whole session. But what I'm going to do is simply say that one of the key elements that came out of this model, which we now have a mainstream course in Luxembourg for the Institute of Directors of Luxembourg, is the whole concept of, so what are the characteristics of a 21st century leader? We believe that there's a new paradigm and a new approach that is significantly needed in the future. So I want to just first elucidate those few points and then move into how some leaders handle the health emergency versus others. So with those few words of introduction, let me move on to my first slide. And the first slide is basically looking at what are the characteristics of a 21st century leader and what do we believe are going to be essential characteristics of a 21st century leader to be able to manage and handle 21st century challenges. And the health emergency is just one of the many challenges they're going to be faced with. The first key element that we were able to pick up was a 21st century leader will be one who has an appreciation of science. Now, I'm not saying that every one of us business people need to be a scientist, but every one of our business leaders and national leaders in the 21st century, if they are going to be grappling with the challenges like the health emergency, they better have an appreciation of science. So that's the first key element that came out of our research and the model that we developed. And if that appreciation is absent, we saw the leaders where the appreciation was absent handle this crisis very differently to the leaders who had an appreciation of science. So on this slide, we see 2 business leaders who are the very epitome of appreciation of science, the leader at Tesla and also the leader of Google. And I'm really happy to say that both of these leaders are clearly 21st century leaders who have understood science. And of course, in the case of Elon Musk, he is a PhD in physics, so no surprise. But I can see the kind of strategies that both these gentlemen have launched in their companies clearly are an indication of their appreciation of science. So for example, both Tesla Corporation and Google are pretty much powered by 100% renewable energy today. And how they handle these crises was very different to some of the other business leaders. Number two, we found that in the 21st century, having a science leader appreciation will then begin to get them thinking about the three emergencies that we have in terms of a 21st century business model. So what are these three emergencies? And these three emergencies stem from what I would like to call a triple bottom line mindset. The concept of triple bottom line was first mooted in 1997 by John Elkington in his book, The Cannibals with Forks. And triple bottom line mindset is where a leader is developing an economic growth model, having considered the impact of that on the planet and the environment, and also taking into consideration its impact on people and society. So a triple bottom line leadership mindset, we found, was the second most important characteristic of a 21st century leader, 21st century leader. The third key imperative that we found was a 21st century leader will appreciate what we have now coined as the 21st century leadership model. And this model looks at three emergencies: the climate emergency, the social and health emergency, and the economic emergency, which is as a result of the climate and social and health emergency, and also considers two major disruptions. What are these disruptions? The disruption of technology and the disruption of geopolitics. And no business is protected from these two disruptions. Last but not least, in the model, we have the area of governance. So on this picture, I have also a slide, I have also shown you two leaders, three leaders, national leaders, one who appreciated science and two who didn't appreciate science. And let me simply say that the two who didn't appreciate science until now, unfortunately, their nations are the number one and number two in terms of majority of fatalities due to COVID-19. So having a leader running a nation or a business who does not appreciate science is a risk to the very lives and the survival of that company. This is what we have found out. And the two leaders on this are, one is from Brazil and one is from the United States. And of course, we have now seen a 21st century leader take over the United States, and we can see a massive change on how they are addressing the climate emergency, starting with the vaccination program, which is now 1.7 million vaccines a day. So how does the health emergency occur? So let me tell you that there is a connection between the climate emergency and the health emergency. Number one, the first health emergency that occurs when companies are ignoring the climate emergency is polluting nations and polluting businesses. So in this slide, I have talked about the most polluting nations of the world, starting with China, United States, Asia, Pacific, and we can say Middle East, India, America, Africa, and Europe in that order. Basically, nations which are continuously burning fossil fuels, which in turn end up polluting. And just 90 big polluters are responsible for almost 63% of all the global pollution. So what does that end up doing? It creates a health emergency in terms of air pollution, and almost 7 million deaths have been recorded last year in terms of the World Health Organization results. And we can see strokes, heart disease, and lung cancers are the major cause of this health crisis created by companies who are ignoring the air pollution. Now, the second big challenge in terms of climate emergency and how we ended up with the pandemic is what I would call massive deforestation, which leads to two issues. Number one, the first issue that deforestation leads to is that you end up with having a massive water crisis, because as we know, if the tree is one of the key elements in the rain cycle, And I've shown you here the nations which have deforested at will, and the nations, therefore, which have also the massive crisis of a water crisis happening. So we can see the leader of Brazil, who I showed you in the earlier slide, has ignored science, both in case of the health emergency and also in terms of the climate emergency, because he has set about deforestation in Brazil, which has never, ever been this high. So let me now try and make the link between the climate emergency and the health emergency. On the left-hand side, we see global deforestation, which has happened in the last 10, 15 years, and which has led to destruction of 70% of forest covers, 60% of animal species have been destroyed. However, here's the point I want to make. If you look at majority of the pandemics that have come on, hit the world, and I think the first speaker gave some of the figures, almost all of them have come from animals, and at least 2 of them have come from bats. So we see Ebola and COVID coming from bats. And as we look at the numbers, we are talking of nearly 110 million infected and 28 million dead in the last couple of weeks. But MERS and SARS. So what is the connection? What happens when you deforest? What happens is that natural habitats of these animals are wiped away. And when they are wiped away, they are much more prone to getting caught in terms of the wet markets of the world, which are in the Asia-Pacific region, from where majority of these illnesses have taken place. And as a result of that, we see a massive crisis in terms of health emergencies occurring as a result of massive deforestation, both in terms of water shortage and in terms of illness and in terms of the pandemic. So if the World Health Organization is keen to ensure that this pandemic stops, they need to do 2 things. Number one, they need to be beginning to ensure that deforestation is halted. Number 2, they need to close down the wet markets of this world, because it's in the wet markets that these animals end up transmitting and their viruses from them, their blood, into the human being, which is exactly what happened in Wuhan, and which will happen in time to come, because there is massive deforestation and therefore massive amount of animals that are getting caught up in wet markets in the world. So let's look at the nations. And the reason I'm looking at nations as in this presentation is to show you how nations which ignored science versus the nations that did well in actually accepting the science. So I've given you the top 10 nations and the bottom 10 nations in terms of handling the COVID-19 health emergency. And the difference is that the ones in the left-hand corner, which are the top 10, are nations led by leaders who, number one, had a very, very clear appreciation of science. They were not scientists, but they were leaders who at least respected science, who got their science teams and their medical teams and even their armies of these nations to bring discipline into this management of the COVID crisis. So New Zealand, Vietnam, Taiwan, and even little Sri Lanka is in 10th place. Now we look at the countries that messed it up in style. Brazil, United States of America, I've given you Russia there. And these are nations which actually ignored the health emergency, who even went to the extent of dissuading people from even wearing a mask during the health emergency. So what does it tell us? In the 21st century, we cannot afford the risk of a national leader or a political leader or a business leader who is ignoring the obvious science. And the nations whose leaders did not have a triple bottom line mindset, but had a single bottom line mindset, and these nations I have given you are all nations that fall into that category in the bottom end of the US, Brazil, UK, and Russia. They were in a hurry to open their nations up for economic profit, notwithstanding the impact that would have in terms of the health emergency. And as a result of that, the entire social fabric of the nation. And we can see these nations have really messed things up in those countries, but things are happening differently. So what's the difference? So we found that in those nations which had leaders, or businesses which had leaders, which ignored the science, the way they went about was by initially denying science. They are the ones who also had denied the climate and emergency. They are the very leaders who denied the health emergency. They have continued to be part of the problem, and it's only now we are seeing there's a change in the United States. They ignored science, they ignored medical advice. The task force that these countries was set up also were ignored by these leaders. They went into very short shutdowns, some of them in having hardly any shutdowns, because they put economy before everything else. They even dissuaded people using masks. They rushed to open the economy. But let's look at the nations that managed it from a science point of view. They looked at being part of the solution. They looked at science-based decisions. They respected their medical experts. They put task force in place to run this crisis. They closed their borders. Their shutdowns were 4 to 6 weeks. They tested, traced, and quarantined, and they looked at social distancing and mask compulsory. And these are the nations which are in the top 10. So most of these nations and most of the businesses that face this crisis ended up developing what I would like to call a code red strategy. And this is going to be needed in the future too, which could be actioned within 24 hours. A strategy to protect and minimize risk to employees, the supply chain personnel, and the communities. They appointed a leader who was the point person so that the decisions didn't fall between the cracks. Implementation was aggressive, and we can now see that happening in the United States. The implementation of a code red strategy is happening there, and companies are doing this too. Compulsory masks and social distance. So the key point I want to make today is that whether you run a business or whether you run a nation, a 21st century leader is one who clearly understands, number one, that they need to appreciate the science behind what is happening. And if you have a business leader who doesn't appreciate the science, or a national leader who doesn't, I believe that is a massive risk to that nation and a massive risk to that business. Number two, a triple bottom line mindset is no longer a luxury, but it begins to fine tune the response as opposed to looking at economic profit at any cost. So let's open the economy, let's get back into business, to a creative economic strategy that minimizes or reduces the risk of impact to its society and its people, and in terms of the health emergency. Last but not least, the climate emergency and the health emergency need leaders who understand that geopolitics and technology are game changers in the world today. Why? Today we see technology playing a massive role, and the digitization of companies, the digitization of communication. I mean, even a big leading company like Unilever says, we don't see ourselves going back to a 5-day week. Now that is a bold statement because they know the new reality is here, and digitization has suddenly got accelerated as a result of this. Number two, supply chains depend heavily on geopolitics, and also understanding that a majority of supply chains have been outsourced, offshored, and suddenly with the pandemic came the need to inshore and begin to start nearshoring supply chains. So geopolitics, understanding supply chains is going to be the new norm. And with those few words, I want to simply end up by once again saying that the climate emergency leads to a health emergency. The health emergency and the climate emergency together then end up delivering us an absolutely devastating economic emergency. And I believe the key learning for me from all of this in terms of managing future disruptions, because managing future disruptions will be the new normal, is that we need to make sure our leaders understand the connection between these three emergencies and understand how important it is to respect science and understand the triple bottom line and respect the 21st century leadership model. Thank you very much. And I hope this has got you thinking in a slightly different way in terms of managing future crises. Thank you.
Apologies, as there was a slight technical disturbance. So thank you very much once again, Dr. Ravi Fernando, for that illustrious sharing of thoughts. So let's hear more from you during the panel discussion as well. So prior to moving on to the panel discussion, let me take you through some of the highlights of the day, which is most importantly, we having more than double the number of participants that we expected. We had over 1,000 registrations for this conference. That's the most important one, and the happy news for all of us during this digital era that we all are getting used to. Then I would also like to highlight the fact that there will be feedback form that will be sent to all the participants at the end of today and as well as tomorrow. So please fill it up and revert back, so which will be a good learning for the organizers as well. Not to forget, there will be a valuable digital certificate which will be sent to you from CPM for participation, as well as your CPD points will also be added up for being a participant for this event for 2 days. And also, one other thing for non-members, but in particular, is that membership at CPM is open for all of you. So please contact office and our director Dirshan Asapularatne for new memberships. And we also would like to welcome you and enroll you as our members in future. With that, let me take your attention towards the panel discussion, and let me invite the facilitator and as well as the panelists. The panel discussion will be facilitated by Mr. Shiran Fernando, who is the Chief Economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. In the list of panelists, we have Mr. Suresh Dimel, the Chairman of Export Development Board in Sri Lanka. And we also have Dr. Ramesh Shanmuganathan, Executive Vice President and Group CIO of John Case Holdings PLC, as well as Ms. Naomi Handumnetti, entrepreneur, fitness fanatic, award-winning marketing specialist, and also will be joined by the 3 speakers of the day as well. Lady and gentlemen, over to you, and Mr. Shiran Fernando, you may proceed with the panel discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Dilhan. Hope everyone can hear me. Pleasure to be moderating this session for CPM, and I think we've had 3 interesting presentations and discussions. No doubt we'll definitely explore it a bit more in detail. But now let me get the panelists to initially, how we'll go about the next maybe 60 to 70, 80 minutes is we will go through kind of a opening round of remarks by the panelists who have not spoken as yet. After which we will have some questions flowing into the panelists who've joined in. And then we will open it out for Q&A from the panelists, from the participants who have tuned in. So to everyone who has been listening in, wanting to know a bit more about the things, for example, Dr. Ravi has mentioned in terms of a board leadership model, or some of the things Dr. Claire has mentioned, about the work from home model or the hybrid model, or if you want to understand a few things more from even what our keynote speaker, Mr. Ranganathan mentioned, this is your opportunity to put some of those questions in to the Q&A box, which is on the Zoom feature here for today's discussion. So having said that, we will straight go into the opening round, and maybe I will get Suresh Dimel, who is the chairman of the EDB, to start off by providing his perspective on the topic, and then maybe we'll have Naomi have a go at it, and then Dr. Ramesh as well after that.
Thank you, Shiran. And thank you, Professor Bhatawala, for inviting me to say a few words and join this panel. I must be excused at 4 o'clock. I have a meeting that I have to rush to, so I will try to say what I have to say before that. First of all, disruptions. Disruptions give us an opportunity to do something different. I like to start there because many people ask me about the future, what our forecasts are, and what's going to happen. Now, this is obviously the million-dollar question. Now, I like to look at it in a positive way and think that when you look back in history, disruptions have given us an opportunity to do new things. And if you look at the evolution of the modern world or the economies of the modern world, they grew soon after major, world wars and things like that. So here is another time when common practice is that people, when things are normal, people just like to keep it that way. And I believe that when disruption happens, it gives us a great excuse to do something different. So I'm going to count on that, and I'm going to bet on that and expect much to happen in the next year that we did not see happen in the past. So although most categories of export products witnessed declines during the last year compared to 2019, coconut-based products, spices and concentrates, all kinds of agro export products grew, Now this shows us that there is opportunity even during a crisis. And I think if you look around the world, we have a situation where people are more concerned now about health foods and about detoxifying foods or clean foods. And spices are known very well to be detoxifying. And also, Sri Lanka is blessed with some superfoods like murunga or moringa and jackfruit. And even, our cinnamon, which is one of the most famous exports out of Sri Lanka. And we are the #1 producer of true cinnamon in the world. So cinnamon too has taken center stage now and grew during the pandemic. And we hope that if we can market it and present it properly and maintain a very high quality, we should be able to expand those markets. Now, our product basket, the present government is motivated and very motivated to improve agriculture. This is for rural development as well as for export development. So it's, and we can see now many people who have lost their livelihoods or who have the businesses declining are going into agriculture. By and large, Sri Lanka is an agricultural country.
And if you look around, anything grows anywhere. So I think it's a no-brainer for people to go into agriculture today and make a huge impact. So I believe that one of the things that we are doing here at the Export Development Board is reaching out to all the stakeholders and telling them all to come together to drive exports in this sector, in export agriculture. So that's just the start. I mean, there's obviously much more to talk about in export development, but disruption and how we can face the future, and that's my start. Thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. So I think an interesting perspective how you're looking at it from an opportunity point of view. And since we have you till 4, I will quickly, after the 2 opening remarks, come back to you on a few follow-up questions, if that's all right with you. Next, we'll move to Naomi.
Thanks, Shiran. Good afternoon, my dear distinguished guests, my fellow panelists, and other participants. Thank you for the opportunity given to me to share my thoughts on current disruptions and implications for business, managing and leading from an entrepreneurial perspective. COVID-19 pandemic challenged all the mainstream management principles and threw us right out of our comfort zones. Managing a business at this time has been difficult in different ways. With the lockdown and travel restrictions, most of the organizations, especially the tourism industry, struggled financially. With zero or insignificant revenue for periods of time, the organizations were left with no option but to reduce their cost structures, resulting in layoffs or heavy pay cuts. Buying power of people worldwide took a heavy blow, and this caused some serious rationalization of spending from luxury and leisure to just basic essentials. For the tourism industry, the recovery was stretched as a result. However, as I see, the hardest punch was taken by the mental health and stability of employees, disrupting the job security, fear of getting infected by the virus, lack of entertainment, and forced changes to the lifestyles, resulted in anxiety and stress levels for them. Productivity, creativity, and many other qualities that most of the businesses expected from these employees were negatively affected. So as a leader, you're required to sustain the business while keeping your workforce motivated, while being agile to the rapidly changing situations. There are so many instances where you had to juggle between your mind and heart. You had to look at a pitch black tomorrow and make decisions today, which made every decision you take have a significant risk in it. The decisions making had to be really fast and conservative and very well calculated. Cash flows was the key during this time period, and drastic measures to not to spend on any luxuries or to spend a single cent unnecessarily. So as a leader, this time I have been closest to my employees that I have never been before. As we realized, this is when they needed us the most. We took measures to continuously support our staff and to be heard all the time. The culture and the values that the organization was built upon truly helped us survive. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Dr. Ramesh?
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Vatvala, for having me. And just echoing on the 3 speakers, I think pretty worthy comments from Surenganathan to, sorry, I missed the second speaker's name, and Ravi as well. I think it's very kind of opportune to reflect on this. Unfortunately, I think it got to the point that a pandemic such as COVID has to come up as a wake-up call to all of us, right? And I think it's sad, but I think the true reality is it actually pushed the reset button on all of us, right? Because I think we were living beyond our means. in a sustainable way. The question which arose was, is it cost of living or cost of lifestyle? What were the must-haves and nice-to-haves? So if you really reflect upon the last 12 months, I think a lot of us have realized that we were probably living a lavish life which was unsustainable anyway, right? And I think the sad reality is, like Mr. Rengana said, the Spanish flu was there about a century ago, but you can't solve a new problem with old methods, right? And that's Ravi's point as well. In terms of reflecting on where we are today, do we have the right tools and right methods to address an issue, right? Even if it's a disruption, whether it's a disruption in your organization, in your environment, in an economy, in a global sense, right? So we all need to understand that a global problem cannot be solved in an isolated fashion. So it needs a global thinking to solve this. I think the closure of borders, I think we've seen that, right? Where people were able to collaborate and collectively give a solution was sustainable, right? I think that is where I am trying to take this to. If you look at that ecosystem thinking, right? Even when you talk of disruption in a business sense, right? So today I say, like, the linear value chains are perishing and value ecosystems are evolving, right? Similarly, even in economies, in we try to solve problems, we have to understand that more and more the problems are going to become complex. In isolation, we can't solve this, right? And the sooner that we realize it, whether it be it an organization, whether it's a minuscule thing of an economy or a macroeconomic factor, if we get together collaboratively, we'll find a better solution. I think that's the approach, I think, which is required, because we can't be foolhardy and try to be mavericks, try to solve a problem which we know that we can't, right? I think that is the approach, I think, which will be more and more needed. I think that's where I think this is a good thing. Bringing chambers. I always said, I think government alone can't solve a problem. The chambers, the enterprises, the entrepreneurs, every stakeholder in the economy must put the shoulder to the wheel if we are to face such challenges in the future, and we are to get on top of it. So I'll park my thoughts there and probably take the questions on the panel.
Thanks, Dr. Ramesh. Just before I start the Q&A segment of it, let me ask everyone, participants, to send in more questions to the chat box or to the Q&A function. We've got a couple so far. Maybe I'll ask the first question from Suresh. 2 months into running the EDB, you've had, I think EDB has really shown a lot of resilience last year, and exports are doing much better than what was feared initially on. How has, as an entrepreneur now leading the state organization, how has it been managing, from a management point of view, how has it been managing the organization now and kind of driving it to the 16 billion target that you all have put on yourselves for 2021, and how you're going to achieve these targets while sort of achieving kind of the national goals that the government and policymakers have set out?
Yeah, Shiran. I was actually pleasantly surprised when I arrived at EDB. I'm a fairly open-minded guy, and I didn't have any preconceived notions, although I was pleasantly surprised that the Export Development Board is actually a private sector driven organization. And the staff I have here are very well experienced with all the issues. We've got many advisory committees of entrepreneurs and business and trade associations and chambers that are in our advisory committees. And we have about 300 private sector people that are in these advisory committees and driving the Export Development Board. So, and I've had predecessors who've done a great job in empowering the staff here. And the staff too, generally popular among these advisory committees. So it made life very easy for me just to take it. The organization itself doesn't need huge disruption. except that we have to now, I think Dr. Ramesh said it very nicely, we have to collaborate. We have to collaborate with multiple stakeholders. And I think it's all about thinking out of the box as well, because the solution to this current crisis is to think out of the box. Now, from coming not only from the private sector, but running my own business or businesses for 40 years, it's I have to be a little careful, because now I am a public servant and I cannot take the risks that I took in private sector. But I still have that mindset, where we do have to do things differently. And I'm getting, my favorite saying, I think I have to say this to you as well, is what Dr. Einstein said about change. He basically said, you are a lunatic if you do the same thing over and over again and expect change to happen to cope with this current pandemic. So we better change our ways. If we don't do things differently, we are not going to have different results. So that was my message to my staff. And I am very happy that everyone's responding positively to that. And I think as a team, together with all the exporters, I want to set a nice high target and expect that this sort of thinking out of the box is going to create great opportunities for us. For instance, I am considered an SME champion, small and medium enterprise, and my businesses are outside of Colombo mostly. And I think that is an underdeveloped area. I think there is a lot more opportunity to grow that the products coming from SMEs and make it export quality. So there is a lot of work that we are actually, I'm working with Professor Vatavela and a group of people for SME empowerment as well. And I'm hoping that we are going to see some positive results and growth from the SME sector as time goes. And I think everyone needs to pull together and work with one vision. I mean, we are a diverse country. We can have diverse thoughts, but we must do what Dr. Ravi very clearly said, the triple bottom line. We don't have a choice. We really don't. And let's all get together and work towards that triple bottom line sooner than later. Thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. If I could get, there's a question coming in for Claire on the chat box as well. You mentioned Dr. Claire online. She mentioned, there's a question. My question is it practical for all the managers who work in the marketing management fraternity? If you take an example from Sri Lanka, okay, is it practical for all the managers who work to be able to work in kind of like a virtual environment? Maybe cite some examples because there's connectivity issues, things like that. Maybe things that you've observed in other countries as well.
Yes, I mean, I think that's one of the, I suppose, paradoxes about digitalization. The enthusiasm for this being our future, and yet issues of connectivity and bandwidth being such a limiting factor. I mean, in all sorts of countries, including many parts of Britain. So that is a limiting factor. But at the same time, there's, I think one of the things that our research has found anyway, that there are lots of examples of people doing, I mean, you're talking largely white collar work, of course, any work that needs sort of physical manufacturing isn't going to be done virtually, but a vast variety of jobs that could be done as long as people had some connectivity to be able to communicate. I mean, and that includes marketing jobs and all sorts of other kinds of managerial and white collar jobs, including bizarre things that you might not think are possible, like the teaching of music online, the giving of therapy online, also, and of course we know all sorts of virtual kind of medical consultations. But I think that's one of the things. It was so fast. The transition was so fast, and in Britain, of course, it was a very late lockdown, and when it happened, there was very little notice. And the people that I spoke to were basically saying, well, we did have the technologies that were possible, like we had Microsoft Teams, for example, but we didn't really know how to use them. We'd had them for a couple of years, we didn't know how to use them, but within a fortnight, we were up and running with all sorts of kind of meetings and communications and service provision, and in all sorts of sort of areas of activity.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Shreya. There's an interesting question on the chat box to Dr. Ravi. I think you clearly explained how the health crisis and the climate crisis are sort of linked together. But there's also a paradox where you said it sort of will cause economic crises. But the question comes from the point of view of, isn't the economic development really really causing the climate issues and the health issues? Is it the other way around? Any thoughts on that loop?
Okay, so I think to answer that question, we need to just look back in time as to when the term sustainable development was first mooted, which was around about 1987, where people talked about development that meets the needs of the present while ensuring that we don't jeopardize the needs of the future generations. So if leaders understood that simple concept, we would already have economic development, which is sustainable. It's the reason we have today a massive crisis in majority of the global economies is because the leaders who run those economies and the business leaders who ran the businesses in those companies did not have that simple policy in mind. So if you end up basically saying development at any cost versus sustainable development, you'll end up with the kind of crisis we are having now. So 1987, we talked about sustainable development, everybody ignored it. In 1997, we talked about triple bottom line. And when I look at which universities in the world are teaching a business course with triple bottom line, you'll be amazed at how few are doing that. Then we come to today's situation where 26 COP meetings have been held. The United Nations is now talking about this massive climate crisis, but we've known this crisis for the last 33 years and ignored it. And I have come to the conclusion through most of the research and the work I have done, and we are now running a course in Luxembourg for European directors, and we called it 21st century leadership, because we believe that is the missing element. So if you have a leader who's been trained in delivering shareholder value at any cost, which is what the majority of people are doing, or delivering GDP growth at any cost, we are going to have the crisis we have. So it's basically creating leaders who have a triple bottom line mindset, who, yes, go after the growth we need, champion the innovation we need, but do so in a sustainable way. So yes, the answer is, it's because we don't have leaders who do that, we end up with the crisis.
Thanks, Dr. Ravi. I think that would have made it clear. Suresh, before I let you go, I'm just hearing Dr. Ravi talking about the need for sustainable products and services from the EDB's perspective as you're mooting this recovery and promoting exports. Is there a priority being placed on these, given that a lot of some of our key export markets are now looking at these criteria for exports beyond just the quality needs as well. How is the EDB getting that ready, and then sort of maybe working with the private sector on it?
Yes, I must tell you the most important thing is the most important thrust sector we have is spices, and organic spices is a no-brainer because most of the spices in Sri Lanka are grown organically. So it's low-hanging fruit, if you will, for us to market as such. Now, Sri Lanka, sadly, is not, even in the 17th century, we were the spice island. People came to Sri Lanka for the spices. People colonized Sri Lanka, I think, for the spices, right? So I asked a friend of mine why Ambalangoda is famous for cinnamon. And the answer was because the Dutch wanted to export it out of Gaul. And that cinnamon grows in most parts of the island, including Colombo, as we know, Colombo 7, right? So we have lost that. We did not value our spices as we should have. So now we have to give it a new life. And I think that we have a fantastic opportunity to sell a high quality organic spice, and through that also all organic agriculture. I think that I was telling you, if I were the owner of Sri Lanka, I would make Sri Lanka 100% organic. And one is, if I own Sri Lanka, I wouldn't be in debt like I am, like the country is today. But anyway, if it was my own company, I wouldn't have got in debt, and I would have made Sri Lanka 100% organic, because 3-4 years from now, we will be the pioneer organic agriculture country in the world, and our products will be worth its weight in gold, because the whole world is now looking for clean food, traceability, and all this kind of stuff, and our president is motivated to do that. His Excellency has shown very clearly that he wants pure food, and that's why one of the reasons why the imports have been stopped. And I hear that he will be very careful about allowing the spices and so on to be imported going forward, because that is a crop that Sri Lanka grows, and we are the best in the world. So if we can, if the whole business community gives up on this idea that it cannot be done, and comes together and says, we will do it, it can be done. Because I think that's my message, is that we have to have the can-do attitude and collaborate, and all of us have to do it together. And I think the COVID has shaken us, and I hope that it has shaken us enough to realize that. And Dr. Ravi, your message, I am a student of Dr. E.F. Schumacher from the 70s. And he was the one who said, small is beautiful, and economics as if people mattered. And that's my principle. And that's why I love the emphasis on small and medium enterprises and rural development, because in Sri Lanka, that is a huge untapped area for development. And I hope that people will go out and invest and work with the farmers, make them entrepreneurs, and make Sri Lanka heaven on earth. Thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. With that, maybe we'll have to let you go for your next appointment. But thanks so much for joining this
Thank you very much.
And I think some of your thoughts will definitely enlighten the audience and the participants. Sticking to the theme of, I think, entrepreneurship, if I can get Naomi back again, and on the SME side as well, in terms of being an entrepreneur in tourism in particular, the last 24 months has not been the most easiest. You mentioned a little bit about being very close to your people, but how have you really survived the immense disruption, and how are you sort of looking forward to in the next kind of 12 to 24 months?
All right, Sharon, thank you. So I can say we survived this situation because of the entrepreneurial mindset, which we have been fostering through the organization for the years that we've been operating. We continuously look for new opportunities, new avenues where it can support the business. However, trying to convert these opportunities to value required adaptability, fast decision making, and a laser focused team. So if you look at my business, actually we employ almost 90% staff from the village. So first and one of the hardest shifts we did in the business is to change the customer base from foreign travelers to local groups. So post-COVID, since the business actually prior to COVID, the business was predominantly structured to cater to the foreign markets. We needed to do too many major shifts, one from a marketing perspective and the other from an operational perspective. The marketing of our business, which was dependent on foreign influencers, foreign online travel agents, as well as local travel agents, which we had to change to attract the local crowd. So from Facebook marketing to Instagram, I've gone heavily on LinkedIn. So these are pretty much tactical efforts that we did to market to the local segment because we were predominantly depending on the foreign tourists. So every element of our marketing materials were redefined to attract the local groups. The packages we offered were redesigned. Pricing, the menu, the food presentation, everything was changed based on the new market segment. Because if you look at the foreign traveler, they book on a bed and breakfast basis. The rate was different. But if you look at the local traveler, they booked on a full board basis or a half board basis. So from the menu, from the menus to the pricing, everything was changed. But saying that, we assured the quality was maintained in every aspect. Though the village mentality is serving the foreigners, but the emphasis was put back on the team, saying how important the local customer is. So we gave the customers the same level of experience, but with a very homely touch. We rigorously looked at reducing the waste of the business, using reusable material and tight controls of cost saved a considerable amount of money. We were able to sustain our business thus far. We took this opportunity to improve the service by creating a good culture amongst the organization and taking care of not only our employees, but their families as well. This is evident through the testimonials that we get from customers in the recent past. If you look at the TripAdvisor reviews, the Facebook reviews, actually has we've increased drastically simply because we've kind of had this shift from our mentality, how important the local guest is. So as for me, this is the greatest win of all. Post-COVID, we have created an agile business model which can accommodate all types of guests. We have got a better understanding about our customer. We had efficient and low-cost operational model along with a great team who amazes the customer in service, food, extraordinary culture, and values. Post-COVID, I have actually rebranded. We are focusing on experiencing nature, culture, and Sri Lankan heritage. So this is what is being resilient by my definition. Thank you, Shiran.
Thanks, Naomi. Mr. Ranganathan, are you online? Are you online, or maybe we can shift to Professor Jawad? I see you. You're online as well. Good to have you on board to bring the perspective from Pakistan as well. Your Prime Minister is in Sri Lanka at the moment, so it's a good timing to have you also joining us as well. Just to get, I think we've had a round of conversation with the panelists, describing their interpretation of the theme and also kind of how it relates to some of their businesses that they've been involved in or the institutions they're running. Your thoughts from sitting in Pakistan and sort of observing what's going on in the business community, things that you would want to share with Sri Lankan audience and a global audience as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fernando. I really thank you and Professor Vatawala and the organizers for this opportunity. Very good afternoon to all of you. In Pakistan, like business organizations, not-for-profit organizations, we were not ready. The organizations and the businesses were not ready to cope with the circumstances which were imposed on the organizations due to COVID-19. We had a very interesting session with CEOs a couple of months ago in which we inquired from the CEOs of various Pakistani as well as multinational organizations in terms of their experiences and in terms of their approaches to cope with COVID-19 or coronavirus. Two common themes emerged, Mr. Fernando, from that conversation, and that is something which I would also like to share with you in terms of managing any university. So the thing is that the first major consideration or priority area was the business continuity. Whatever we are doing, we have to be able to sustain our business irrespective of the sector in which we are operating. So for many businesses, the continuity of the business to be able to continue to provide the product and services which we are manufacturing was something which was the most important thing, and that was upon us, number one. The second thing, in addition to business continuity, which was extremely important, was to do with the taking care of employees, customers, and other stakeholders, which is the social responsibility side. So this means that while businesses, they were interested in business continuity, while they were interested in continue to offer products and services for which they, which is the became their responsibility that they have to make sure the well-being and safety and health of their employees and customers and all other stakeholders. So these were two things which remained priority area for many organizations in Pakistan, as well as I hope, I believe elsewhere. As I said, that businesses, they were not really ready to cope with it. So lockdown became a bit too many businesses. It varied from one sector to another. So some sectors surely they suffered more than other sectors. For example, the hospitality sector, it suffered the most. The education sector also a lot due to COVID-19. Construction sector also suffered. But one good thing which the government of Prime Minister Imran Khan did announce, and to a large extent that promise was also delivered, was that a relief package was issued by the government of Pakistan as well as by the State Bank of Pakistan in order to provide the financial relief to businesses. So whereas there was disruption due to lockdown, there was also some kind of financial relief provided by the State Bank of Pakistan in terms of, for example, easy interest loans, as well as some kind of support in order to continue to provide employment to organizations and businesses. From but that disruption also forced the managers and leaders to take a more introspective role in terms of our approach to organizations, our approach to management, and perhaps our approach to the bottom line. So is it just the economic bottom line, or is it just the financial bottom line upon which we have to evaluate the success or otherwise of an organization? Or should we also include, or should the organizations also include the other important indicators, such as the organization's contribution to health and social responsibility and social uplift of the society and the community of which it is a part. So, Mr. Fernando, these were a few quick thoughts which come to my mind in terms of organizational response to COVID-19 in Pakistan.
Thanks, Professor Javed. Some interesting remarks, which maybe we can get into later on in the discussion. Dr. Ramesh, if I get you online and now as Group CIO for leading conglomerate in Sri Lanka, as well as leading the IT company as well, which does a lot of consultancy overseas. And given the disruption we've really seen on the digital side, where it has accelerated the need for organizations to really be more agile, how have you seen the transformation maybe within the organization and within companies in Sri Lanka, and compared to, say, some of the countries you consult, some of the companies you consult overseas?
Right. I think one thing that I just want to put things in perspective is, obviously disruption is a pretty loosely used word, right? And most of the time, my benchmark for disruption is most organizations who self-disrupt themselves are the most successful. And obviously, once in a while, you get external factors coming disrupting you as well. But from a tech point of view, that has been the mantra which has worked for John Keys. We've always kind of looked at the technology portfolio in terms of what will enable us to get on to the next wave, right? So to speak, because now say we had Microsoft Teams institutionalized at John Keys as way back as in 2015, but it only became mainstream of adoption in 2020 because of the pandemic. So it is deploying a technology and really leveraging and using it, two different things, right? It's a change management, like what I said, everyone says people bottom line. How many people really acknowledge and really put that to practice, right? So the whole equation of intent versus execution is two different things. So I think that's where I feel most of the organizations are struggling, though they have an intent and they acknowledge that, okay, digital transformation or digital disruption is an imperative, but they don't know how and what to do about it, right? So here, you actually got a kind of a gun to your head and say, you don't have any option, just do it, right? And a lot of the people start doing things because they had to, right? So schools went online, all the retailers went online, everything became digital because there was no other way, right? So I think that's the sad part of the whole equation, because I think if we systematically have done it, like even what Suresh mentioned about exports, agri-tech. So Sri Lanka has, if you look at the Sri Lankan economy, we are still about 7% of our GDP is agriculture, right? 70% is services, balance is industry, right? But don't we have a bigger potential than 7% if we even go agri-tech, right? So tech has a huge role to play if we really want to boost the economy, and if you really want to grow up per capita GDP to the 5,000 that what we're talking about, right? So digital definitely have a role to play, but it has to be engineered to disrupt, not wait for an external event to disrupt. Right? I think that is where I feel we are struggling, and that is where, if you look at in most of the organizations that we consult, even overseas, the better ones are actually looking at disrupting themselves because they feel they could do better. Right? Others kind of wait for the industry to get disrupted to do something about it. Right. I hope I answered your question.
Yes. I'm sure there might be a few follow-up questions from the participants as well. We'll wait for that as well. Dr. Clare, if I get you online right now, I think there was a question in terms of mental well-being, especially in this age of working from home and also hybrid kind of options. What's the kind of discussion that you're seeing right now, or from literature, or from maybe even case studies done globally, which might be very relevant for us to understand as to how organizations are really prioritizing? Some are really looking at it, some are, thinking, it's still part of the process, too early on to start thinking of it because we might, go back to the office environment. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose there's quite a lot in what you just said there. I suppose one of my first responses is, I don't think there are signs at all, or even a desire to go back to how it was. I think that is really the rationale for talking about a hybrid model, is neither employers or employees, if they have the choice, want 100%. Neither do they want the 100% remote working, nor do they want 100% back as it was. I think another part of my response would be, one of the things that this flushes out is people are very different. And obviously we know that in terms of circumstances. So economically, people are different. Their living circumstances are different, and the extent to which that facilitates being able to work from home. You know, we talked about connectivity, but space as well. You know, if really very little space, and working from home means sitting on the edge of the bed with a laptop, that is not sustainable. And that puts pressure. I mean, that's one of the sources of a kind of decline in well-being, as is the fact that people are different in what I was saying, and sort of jokingly in my image of the artist, that's, you know, some people have actually thrived in the kind of social isolation, relative social isolation that the pandemic has enforced, and other people have really suffered. So well-being policies definitely have to come from that starting point of people being different. What have companies been doing about it? I mean, of course, some have been doing nothing. Some have been insisting that their staff actually do come into work, even though there's not a necessity, and have been escalating stress in that kind of way. But the companies, I think, the organisations that have been doing positive things, I mean, one is being alert and watching, trying to watch staff. So noting if people don't join online meetings, if they're silent and invisible within them, just following that up with individual inquiries and check-ins. You know, many larger organisations will have some kind of staff well-being facility. It might be provided by HR, it might be a contracted out facility that is available to provide counselling about anything, or even financial advice. Organisations have been really emphasising and reminding staff of that availability. Some organisations have been even, you know, making a point of contacting. So I mean, we'd be familiar with having perhaps annual or even biannual individual conversations, development reviews, performance reviews, but trying the more well-being reviews of contacting staff, having individual conversations. Those are some of the initiatives that I've seen.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Yeah. Anyone else who wants that? Professor Javad or Dr. Ravi?
So I had a thought, Shiran.
Go ahead.
When I listened to our export development chairman, and he mentioned that agriculture has been and might continue to be a key element for Sri Lanka. And I think Ramesh also made the point that agri-tech is the way forward. So if one looks at the biggest trend in agriculture today is the advent of precision agriculture. And precision agriculture is using 90% less water and is able to have significantly higher yields. Now, I think it will be a mistake for Sri Lanka to persist with what I would call traditional agriculture in terms of mass agriculture, because climate emergency will put paid to a lot of the crops. Will either have crazy rainfall or will have droughts. And therefore, I think one strategy that maybe Sri Lanka should consider is to follow the model of Israel, follow the model of Holland, where precision agriculture, Holland today is the second largest exporter of agricultural produce in the world after America. So I hope that Sri Lanka's future agriculture strategy is not an extension and Wageningen, where there are 14 universities that are focusing on precision agriculture, and then try to be a player in that field. So that's the thought I want to leave with the Export Development Board, that we have to move. I love his idea about organic, and if you're in precision agriculture, then you can do that as well. Because your growing medium is more often than not water and high-tech measurements. So I would strongly urge Sri Lanka to also look at precision agriculture, as we are next to India, where 41% of India is already facing a drought. There are agriculturalists, I mean, every day on news, you see what's happening with Indian agriculture. So I think here we are well positioned to take advantage of some of those opportunities.
Thanks, Ravi. You've been kind enough to answer some questions directly coming on the Q&A chat box. But maybe if I, maybe for the benefit of everyone else who's tuned in, I think there was an interesting question on the future of supply chains with the current pandemic. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit, just for the benefit of all.
Sure. So I think,
and then we can get Professor Jabbar.
Yeah. So I think what happened in the late 90s was where we absolutely went outsourcing, outshoring, offshoring, simply to get the lowest unit cost. Here comes the pandemic. Suddenly all those supply chains are locked out. So now I think a global trend that is going to emerge is significant outsourcing. Suddenly companies will have to relook at nearshoring as opposed to farshoring. In terms of outsourcing, I think once again, inshoring as much as possible will become a new trend. So I can see the climate emergency is going to dramatically impact supply chains and business models. And technology will also disrupt all of that, because to me, technology is a fantastic opportunity. So I think one has to look at managing supply chains from the perspective of rethinking the supply chain strategies in terms of the business models that a company has, and not be constantly looking at chasing what I call a single bottom line story. Who is going to give us this unit at the lowest price? So even if they're in Timbuktu, let's place the order there. I mean, I'm telling you, you can be getting the lowest price, but if the shipment can't get to you, what's the point? So I think there's got to be a massive rethink of supply chain strategy, a massive rethink of mobilizing technology, because having set up, been at Slintech and setting it up in the early years, I mean, we were so amazingly inspired by creating a first world Slintech that was going to, create products and services which are first world. So I think technology and supply chains are going to change dramatically.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Ravi. Professor Jabbar, do you want to add something?
Sure, thank you for this. Taking Professor Ravi's, I would say, contribution, very valuable contribution forward, I would say that perhaps it's also an opportunity for us to take a look at the impact of COVID for different segments of the industry. In Pakistan, our experience is this, that one of the most affected segment, most adversely affected segment was the small and medium enterprises. So bear in mind that micro, small, and medium enterprises, they represent over 90% of organizations in Pakistan, and they contribute roughly 40 to 50% of the GDP, and they are also responsible for around 40 to 50% of export earnings. So according to various studies which have been published recently, COVID-19 outbreak and lockdowns, it affected all the sectors, but in particular, it affected small and medium enterprises due to obvious reasons. So I can very quickly spell out the major areas and major dimensions in which COVID-19 disrupted, if I use this word, the operations and the impact of SMEs. I can say that the variety of issues which were faced by these businesses included around 68% they experienced financial issues or financial disruption. Around 48 to 50% they experienced supply chain disruption issues. 45% experienced decrease in demand, the market demand. And very much connected to this, around 40% they experienced reduction in sales and profits. Around 3/4 of these SMEs, they expected a decline in sale by more than 60%, while around 2/3 of the companies, they expected a decline in profit of more than 60% due to COVID-19. So how exactly did they respond to this situation? They used a number of strategies. For example, applying for a loan. I have already said that State Bank of Pakistan offered some generous schemes in order to provide some support to businesses. So 18 to 20% of them, they sought to apply for to avail such schemes. Sadly, at least 20% either shut down their business completely or partially to reduce cost. So that is also something. And another sad dimension is that at least 40% of them, they considered and implemented partial or complete layoff of employees, and around 10 to 15% they reduced staff salary. Mr. Fernando and colleagues here, variety of issues were faced by SMEs in Pakistan in terms of the financial stability, in terms of the market stability, and in terms of their ability to continue to offer employment to their workers. And they offered a variety of responses. Of course, this is another test, and that is something which we would have to examine 1 year down the road in terms of the ability of the organizations to successfully respond to this situation. That's all from my side. Mr. Fernando.
Thanks, Professor Jawad. Naim, if I bring you, I think just touching on what Professor Jawad was talking about, the SME segment as well as the ones who are most impacted, being a female entrepreneur yourself, how has women entrepreneurs generally been impacted by COVID? Has it been any different to some of the other entrepreneurs and the challenges they're facing? And I know recently you wrote an article in terms of how do we really support them? Maybe some ideas from that you want to put forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, Shiran. I think it's timely that we speak about female entrepreneurs seriously. Simply because there are so many females out there, and especially with the current pandemic and the opportunities that it has created. Working from home is accepted. We don't have to. So it's, I think, an amazing disruption for the female entrepreneurship and female workforce. So some of the areas that I think the female entrepreneurs can be supported is focus on improving access to credit facilities. Now, if you look at when I started off from leaving a corporate career to becoming an entrepreneur, I was not granted a loan from the bank, although I had my business proposal. I had to piggyback on my husband to get a loan. But after 3-4 years in business, now it's accepted. Now my business is accepted, all of that. So there are SME sector female entrepreneurs that should be taken seriously, who has great ideas, which can be taken into global scale. Also, understanding the seasonal cash flows. Now, especially if you look at the tourism business, we have a seasonal cash flows. There are few dry months in a year where we have very low cash flows. But from October till early May, our cash flows are very good. So that's one. And then provide training in building new skills. Now, if you look at the information on the internet, if you look at resources like LinkedIn or so many platforms, most of it is actually in English. There is the rural areas, predominantly they need support. And all of these, I believe, these business plans, how to do a business plan, how to do a business proposal, how to do a marketing plan, basic things should be converted into Sinhala and Tamil both. So that we can take it from there, educating them. Then another, how you can support a female entrepreneurship is actually accepting them as a dual role. A female, she's a mother, she's a wife, and she's a businesswoman. So giving her that space to kind of operate and run her business, I think will encourage more females to come into the workforce as well as entrepreneurship. Because the current social stigma, sometimes I feel this even something that I have got directly from the society as well. That how can you run a business of this stature? Are you ignoring your family? So that acceptance of a woman running a business or running a family, being a wife, and also being a fitness enthusiast, not like myself. So that acceptance should come from the society. Then I think mentoring other women. Now there are successful top entrepreneurs, there are top panelists here. So how can we have access to your? How can we get on board as mentoring? So there are some options of that sort that we're looking at. And I think creating access to networks, like I mentioned. Now, if you look at LinkedIn, now today I can send a note to Mr. Suresh Dimel and asking to connect with him. So how do I take it from there? How can I go and meet him? Now, Shiran, for example, how do we as entrepreneurs come to the chamber and meet you? So if there is some kind of network and easily accessible networks built, I think that will really support female entrepreneurs. Also, to have these seminars and these panels in Sinhala and Tamil as well, so that we do justice to the entire country. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. Any other views from the panelists on supporting women entrepreneurship, given the disruption, and also be a source for driving the economic acceleration we so needed in Sri Lanka? Dr. Ravi, your mic is on mute.
I fully endorse what she has said, because in terms of Sri Lanka's female participation in the workforce, I think it's about 30%, whereas globally it's 40 to 50%. So I think one way to encourage that is to understand the work-life balance and the multiple roles of women. And I think some years ago, there was a program I created for MS titled Women Go Beyond, which was basically created to help ladies who are in the middle and lower middle ranks in the company to rise to general managerial and CEO levels. And that strategy, I think, ended up populating about 30 to 40% of key MS positions went to women over a period of time. So I think there have to be strategies in place, like the Women Go Beyond program, which create the groundwork for these ladies to move forward while continuously accepting the various roles they have to play. And that I think is a benchmark program that many companies should be looking at for their company.
Thanks, Dr. Ravi. Dr. Sad, you want to say something? I'll just see your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to also suggest there's a link between having an increased proportion of women that are leading companies with achievement of the triple bottom line. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Supriya Garikpati at Liverpool, and a colleague, they've conducted quite a sophisticated analysis of the performance of countries during the pandemic, minimizing deaths and getting the economies back on track, corresponding with the gender of the leaders, and they do find statistically significant evidence that those countries with a woman leader have done better in the pandemic.
Right. Moving, let me, is there any other comments on this area, or maybe I can move to Dr. Ramesh? A bit about, you talked about kind of the digital transformation taking place within the conglomerate and overseas. But really, realistically for companies, and you must be helping a lot of these companies in their digital transformation, what are some of the key aspects towards it? And as leaders and as managers, how should they sort of get involved in this process?
I think it's a journey, because it's not a straight or easy thing to do, right? Like any transformation, it's not a kind of a whisking a wand and getting things done, but it's a journey that you've got to embark upon. And I think that's where I feel a lot of what the panelists said comes to bear in terms of whatever business that you are in. You obviously need to rethink, right? So it's an opportunity. I think pandemic is an opportunity to rethink your business, right? Reevaluate your assumptions and remodel your way. So digital obviously then becomes a glue in doing that. So let me take one example. You all were talking about supply chain modernization, right? So today, I think when we did MBAs about 20 years back, we were taught about forward integration, backward integration. Now it's legacy, right? No one talks about forward integration, backward integration. You are talking about ecosystem thinking. Stick to your core business, collaborate with others, create the value chain, right? So that's where digital has a stronghold, right? So I always think, if you think your business as a Lego toy, if you were to break it down and rebuild it, will you build the same thing? So the digital gives you the same phenomenal opportunity to rethink what will you build with the same set of Lego toys. Would you use the same blocks, or would you just do half of the blocks and maybe scale the same thing in a better way, right? So I think that thought process is where I think we're lacking. We just throw technology at a problem and think magic would happen. It will not, right? If fundamentally you got to change the way you approach the problem, redefine the problem, and revalidate the assumptions. Say, for example, now online, say our key supermarkets, for example, right? So we had on average 100 orders a day where children were buying for their parents who were living here and children were living overseas, right? All of them come pandemic, none of the supermarkets had stores, everyone cramped up onto our website and it crashed, right? So what happened? We scaled it up in a matter of months to take 5,000 orders a day. Come wave one, lockdown was lifted, it came down to 200. Everyone was clamoring back to the outlets, right? So it's a human behavior. The issue is digital will not change the human behavior, right? So that is where I said it's a tough choice. Whether it's a choice that you say Keels as a choice. We took a call saying whether the momentum continues or not. We want to do this. So now last month we launched a Keels mobile app as well, because we said this is we want to do this because this is a transformation. We want to disrupt ourselves and we want to continue the journey, right? And we would hope that people will see the benefit, and especially with data monetization, now we can push dynamic shopping lists. So we could create the traction because we believe that we could create traction on the channel, on omnichannel strategy, right? So that is the conviction we need, right? Just because now people went back, we now said, now let's just stop there and just go back to the stores, right? So I think that is where I feel conviction is lacking from a leadership in terms of adopting these new methods of doing this. I think that's probably what Ravi was mentioned, right? You can't solve today's problem with old thought leadership. You need thought leadership which is current and leveraging the current tech, like the big data, AIs, the robotics, everything, right? So that is the need of the hour that we need to move. I think if you look at Elon Musk to Satya, they are being very, very vocal about it, and they are pushing this because they feel there could be phenomenal benefit in terms of you can create more value by consuming a lesser number of assets, right? So that is more sustainable than the way we are doing business today.
Thanks, Dr. Ramesh. Dr. Claire, I just want to maybe bring you in. There was a comment in terms of some job losses that are taking place because of COVID. Maybe some services which were required before now either getting automated or people are getting more leaner, and as a result, staff are being sort of cut. For those in that process of maybe reinventing themselves or reinventing their skill sets, any advice or anything that you've sort of been from your experience as well?
That's a difficult question. From the context that I'm familiar with, I think I'm seeing a couple of different things. I can echo what the speakers who are talking about SMEs, like Naomi, about people having an entrepreneurial mindset and reinventing themselves. So amongst SMEs, just because they have to, I see that. But amongst people that are in larger organizations, I feel that it's still a state of limbo, because we still have, in a British context, we still have furlough, so the kind of government supports that other people have spoken about, that are keeping a lot of people in jobs that they wouldn't otherwise have, and therefore that also puts a brake on any kind of reinvention or reskilling. So what comes next, I think we have still to see it, because I think quite a proportion of those people, will end up losing their jobs, not necessarily because of digitalization actually, but because of other economic reasons. And I don't think there's thought yet about reskilling, reinvention there. So for a big proportion of the workforce, I feel as they're living in a limbo.
Right. And Naomi, there was a question coming in terms of, it's probably for you, it's any prediction on the airline, travel and tourism industry for 2021? A difficult one to answer, but since you're the most closest to it.
We are predicting, actually, people are waiting to travel. We are generating inquiries. People are checking with us. But we are giving ourselves probably towards the end of this year to at least see tangible tourists coming into the country. So that is my view.
Right. So, okay. So you a better second half this year, is it? Or
I don't know. If I may add, I read this article from the Emirates chairman who said by 2023 is where they will see a full recovery of the airline segment, 2023.
Right.
So that's at least about 2 years away. Full recovery.
Right. Right. I think we're towards the end of our discussion. We have, I think, about 10 minutes to go. Maybe in conclusion, any final remarks that you'd like to leave the panelists with? We could go across the board, maybe take 1 to 2 minutes each. And there's also, I think, a question to Ramesh as well. Digital is the way out under the present situation. However, we're faced with unstable internet and power failures. Don't you think like other countries, IT and power improvement is necessary?
Yeah, I think if I may just touch on that, I think the guys spoke of this in the previous panel as well. I think if you go by the World Economic Forum country rankings as a benchmark, we are ranked at 84, right? And Singapore is number 1. And from a technology point of view, we also ranked as 106th. And in terms of innovation, around 106, right? So if you're really contending as a global economic player, obviously we have a lot more to do as a country, right? And I think, so that's why I think digital is not a mantra or kind of a miracle cure for everything. It is just a means to an end. Like I always say, tech and digital is a means to an end. It's not going to deliver you value. It can obviously give you better scale, better economies of scale, and better access to markets and better ways of doing things. but there are fundamental issues as a country we need to fix, right? And that's something I think we as stakeholders of the economy have to work towards. I don't think we can blame the government or a single person for it. And all of us are in it together. So I guess either we work together or get ourselves out of it, or we are doomed.
Thanks, Ramesh. Any closing remarks before we wind up?
For me, I think I would say that, as I said, it's a very pertinent topic, but I think it's a wake-up call for us to definitely rethink what we have been doing and what we ought to be doing, and definitely look at changing course and not go back to the old ways of doing things because the pandemic is over. We have vaccines, right? I think that's what I hear from most people. So I'm going to get a vaccine and life is going to be normal again, right? I don't think we should have that assumption and go back to the old ways of doing things, right? We definitely should take this as a cue to change.
All right. Dr. Ravi, your mic is on mute.
Let the ladies say their last comments and then we come. Let's give the ladies a chance first, yeah?
Naomi.
Closing remarks.
Shall I go?
Okay. Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
I mean, one of the things that through the discussion that I was thinking about, that what the pandemic has shown us is that juxtaposition that we've needed both more and more collaboration, but also more and more boundary management. So the solutions of coming out of this, and the one sense of showing us that the world is very integrated and no country can come out of this alone. But on the other hand, the ways in which countries or regions are coming out of it is by sort of very tight boundaries, borders, and so on. And perhaps that's a metaphor for something of the future, that the future needs that combination, that juxtaposition of increased collaboration, but also borders as a metaphor, by which I would mean sort of tight parameters, clear parameters, kind of clarity of briefs. And this I'm applying particularly to the future of digitalization. So being clear about the briefs when we're commissioning, the clarity of roles, and so on. So that's just a thought that I would offer at the end.
Thanks.
Yeah. This is, I'm taking off from Mr. Suresh Dimel's presentation earlier. The opportunities that he showed us in agriculture by 2025, the demand for organic crops, demand for organic food, the demand for organic cosmetics. So I think this pandemic is a tremendous, I would say, an eye-opener for everybody. Like Dr. Ramesh said, let us not go back to where we were, or the old ways of thinking. Give us as all of us an opportunity to be entrepreneurs. And I fully endorse the fact that rural area has tremendous opportunity, because I myself is a commercial farmer. So there's huge potential in the rural sector, but they don't have accessible to technology. There's no water, there's no absolutely nothing. So there's a lot that we can do, and there's heaps of resources in terms of culture and mentality of people as well in the rural communities, and they are with open arms waiting for help. So let us be positive. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn to just share a couple of thoughts. I think the key thought I would like to challenge every business that is operating in Sri Lanka is to ask the question, does it have the right leaders? Because great business happens not because of anything else, but you need to have 21st century leaders. Because having 18th century and 17th century leaders running a 21st century business is an absolute recipe for disaster. So I think every business and even in terms of the government sector and public sector, we need to empower and develop a set of very smart people who A, appreciate science, B, understand the triple bottom line, and C, understand the 21st century model of business. And I think if companies and nations invest time and money to build that cadre of leaders, everything else will follow. But if we persist with 18th century leaders running our 21st century businesses, the recipe is absolute disaster. So I just want to end by saying that's my key message. Build up your leaders to be 21st century sensitive leaders if you want your business to survive the disruptions that are going to come at us. Thanks, Shiran.
Thanks, Dr. Ravi. So that brings in to this insightful, I think, discussion. It's been a privilege to moderate it and hear wide-ranging insights from agriculture to leadership to technology to women entrepreneurship to even understanding, what's going on in the UK and even in Pakistan. So thank you to all my panelists for joining in and for contributing. Let me hand it back to Dr. Dilhan.
Thank you very much to you, moderator, Mr. Shiran Fernando. That was superb job, and it's a great way that we summed up the entire panel discussion with very thoughts of different panelists, of course, locally and as well as internationally. So let me once again take the opportunity to thank our session facilitator, Mr. Shiran Fernando, as well as the panelists, Mr. Suresh Dimel, Professor Jawad Saeed, Dr. Ramesh Shanmuganathan, as well as Ms. Naomi Hadumnetti, also joined by our three speakers today, Dr. Ravi Fernando, Dr. Kaya Rig, and as well as Mr. S. Ranganathan. In conclusion, let us take you through the signature summing up of all of events that we used to do, which is something significant that we only see at CPM events only. And let me hand over the proceedings to the best in business, that is Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka, to do the session summing up. He is the head of technical sessions and faculty member and a management consultant at the Postgraduate Institute of Management at the University of Sri Jayawardena. Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dilhan. Well, first of all, let me extend a big thank to all the distinguished panelists, presenters, and the speakers. Professor Lakshmanar Vatavada leading in the front, and still he's like on the course. So my task is, as the head of the technical aspects, to look at the summing up. So I would take two folds for that. The first part is, let me use a term which is familiar with us. This is PCR. Now the PCR test is, which is very familiar to us. That is the polymerase chain reaction, which is the antibody testing and looking at whether we are in the COVID-19 positive or negative. So if I use the same acronym in a management point of view, in a leadership point of view, which is called as a philosophical contented realist test. So let me clarify. So the philosophical means if you look at the simple meaning of philosophical is about relating or devoted to a particular study or a phenomena in terms of looking at the nature of knowledge, reality, existence, and so on. So that is a philosophical side. If you look at the contented side, that is the more or less the meaning is, of course, asserting something as a position in an argument or looking at struggle to surmount in a difficulty. So that's the contented meaning. So if you look at the realist, the meaning is a person who accepts a situation as it is and is prepared to deal with accordingly. So that's a name. So if you look at this in my first area, the old philosophers would like to ask three fundamental questions. What is the reality? So what is the expected situation? Of course, what is the kind of, in that realistic point of view, what is the desired good life which you are looking at? and who am I? So like, what is our proposition? So that is a philosophical approach. If you look at the content, that is more strategic. So any strategic point of view, fundamentally, 4 questions. It's about how to grow, how to defend, what are the competitor moves, and what is our unique value proposition. So that is the content, more strategic aspect. So if you look at realist, it's entrepreneurial. So the entrepreneurial is all about connecting the dots, getting things as it is, and going for the new, risky, the innovative area. So having used that, may I couple these 3 and ask in terms of the philosophical contented realist test means in our organizational fronts, in our working fronts, in our national to down the line to the micro level. So are we having that PCR test, not that COVID-19 test? So with that, may I draw your attention to the 3 spheres that we have discussed throughout the day in this international conference. So if you look at the philosophical side, so here I'm not going to focus on the panelists or the speakers. I would take their ideas. So the core philosophical argument, the key articulation is that we should have our thinking in terms of 21st century leadership, triple bottom line execution, thinking, application, strategic corporate sustainability agenda, scientific based decisions. So, ladies and gentlemen, so we should ask a question that have we got our philosophy right? Have we got our thinking on science base? Are we aligning and revisiting our policies based on scientific approaches? So that is the philosophical basket. So if you look at the content aspect, that's the strategic aspect, where the customer behavior domain changes, the sources of funds aspect, building technology. So it has been discussed about virtual spaces and work setting, work-life balance aspects, digital literacy domain, cyber leadership, and of course, during the discussion, it was highlighted that precision agriculture. So all these are the questions we need to ask in our working fronts: how to grow, how to defend. So what are our competitor moves in terms of our business versus others, from a country's point of view, from a regional, from the micro organizational individual level. And of course, we should ask the question, how is our unique value proposition? So that those are the strategic aspects, contented aspects. If we look at the realistic aspect, that is the entrepreneurial aspect, where we need to revisit and relook at, and multiple opportunities galore in terms of supply chain developments, digital transformation aspects, SME development, particularly in the export development domains. They very much highlighted that agriculture to agri-tech in the future. So how that contribution can made a big role. Human resource management, human resource development, alignment, realignment, women in entrepreneurship. So if you look at all these 3, ladies and gentlemen, so may I ask a question that how is our PCR? So are we looking at that as a one basket? So in our working fronts, in this COVID-19 transition, one can say transition. Now it has been discussed that it will take another 1-2 years or so. So that means post-COVID-19 is coming up. So it's a transition. It's a health pandemic. So in such situation, so are we going to look at this entire ecosystem holistically? So it was very much discussed about the approach is in line in terms of collaborative, synergistic, integrative, rethinking, redesigning, realignment, and so on. So that means in a PCR test, in a COVID scenario, we look at whether infected or not. It doesn't mean that you are a patient or not. The point here is that in emerging disruptions and the implications for business point of view, so we need to look at the fact that how we are going to see our philosophical alignment, contented strategic questions of those fundamental questions, and entrepreneurial approach. So if you are going to do that, so that is the core one integrated basket of thinking, which we would like to take it forward. So with that, may I conclude my summing of speech for today. So within that parameters, we are going to further look at this, how the managing and leading aspect coming up for tomorrow's as well. And we would like to further establish how the PCR test is in the card. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samantha Ratnakar, for that wonderful summing up of the session. So with that, we come to the conclusion of the first day of CPM International Management Conference. Before we wind up, let me kindly remind you that we will be sending you a feedback form to your inboxes. So you are expected rather to respond back to us, so that will enrich our value of events and activities in future. And that's very good feedback for everyone to analyze where we stand as well. Apart from that, do not forget to join us tomorrow as well at the same time. And if you do that, you will be able to earn your digital certificate, the valuable one offered by CPM, as well as earn your all-important CPD credits as well. For the non-members, feel free to contact CPM Director Mr. Dirshan Aspuratna for new memberships. And that's also an important message we want to do. We want to enhance our opportunity provided to all future leaders of this country, all professionals to enroll with us, and we can enrich the value that we offer to the society and the world at large. Having said that, let me conclude by saying a good day to all of you and have a pleasant time until we join yet again tomorrow. Thank you very much.